It was past midnight, and the road stretched out before me like a ribbon of dark emptiness. Driving long-haul trucks, you get used to the isolation, the weight of silence pressing against your chest. But that night was different. I was making my way through a stretch of highway in the Midwest. Dead quiet. No other cars, no lights, just the hum of my truck's engine and the soft tapping of rain on the windshield. I'd been on the road for nearly 12 hours straight, pushing hard to make a delivery. The kind of work that makes you see things if you're not careful. But I wasn't seeing things that night. No, what I saw was real. I was about halfway between towns when I saw it. A figure, standing on the side of the road. At first, it didn't seem strange. People hitchhike, even in the dead of night, especially out in the middle of nowhere. But as I got closer, my headlights swept over the figure, and something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was a woman, dressed in a thin white dress, the kind you'd expect to see at a summer wedding, not on a rainy, freezing night. Her face was pale, almost ghostly in the glow of my headlights. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring straight ahead. Not at me, not at the road, just ahead. I slowed down, instinctively. Something in me, call it compassion, or maybe just curiosity, made me stop. I rolled down my window just a crack. The cold air hit me like a slap. "You need help?" I called out. No answer. I leaned out a little more. "Hey lady, are you all right?" Her head turned slowly, too slowly. When her eyes met mine, I felt a chill deeper than the night air. They were black. Not dark, not shadowed, black, like two empty pits. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. It was like something had clamped down on my chest and wouldn't let go. Then, as suddenly as it started, the moment broke. The woman turned away, walking down the road, disappearing into the fog and rain like she was never there. I slammed the window shut and floored it. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I kept glancing in the mirrors, expecting to see her standing there on the side of the road, or worse, right behind me in the cab. But there was nothing. Just the rain and the dark highway stretching out into the distance. A few miles down the road, I saw a truck stop. I pulled in, needing to calm my nerves. The place was practically deserted, just a few trucks parked in the lot, their lights off, engines silent. I parked my rig and headed inside, desperate for a cup of coffee or something to bring me back to reality. The place was as old and run down as you'd expect for a stop out in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place where the walls are stained yellow from years of smoke and the coffee is as thick as mud. The guy behind the counter looked like he hadn't seen a customer in hours. I grabbed a coffee and sat down, still trying to shake the image of that woman from my mind. That's when the guy behind the counter spoke up. "You all right, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed nervously, more out of fear than humor. "You could say that. Picked up a weird vibe back there on the road." He nodded, like he'd heard it before. "You see her?" I froze mid-sip. "What do you mean?" "The woman in white. Seen her myself a few times. Most guys out here have." I didn't know what to say. "So, what is she?" He shrugged, wiping down the counter. "No one knows for sure. Some say she's a ghost, a woman who died on the highway years ago. Others think she's something else, something older." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "But there's one thing everyone agrees on. If you stop for her, if you talk to her, things start happening." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Like what?" The guy just shook his head. "Weird things. Trucks breaking down, people going missing. One guy, well, let's just say he didn't make it through the night." I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I paid for my coffee, left a generous tip, and got back in my truck. I didn't care how tired I was. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. But as I drove, the feeling of being watched never left. Every shadow on the road seemed to move, every flicker of light looked like it was hiding something. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. And then, about an hour later, my truck started to sputter. I cursed under my breath, praying it was just a fluke. But the engine kept cutting out, slowing down, until finally, it stalled completely. I was in the middle of nowhere, no lights, no buildings, nothing but trees on either side of the road. I tried to restart the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. The only sound was the rain pattering on the windshield and the wind howling through the trees. And then, I saw her. In the rearview mirror, standing about 50 feet behind my truck. The woman in white. Just standing there, watching me. I locked the doors, my heart racing. She didn't move, didn't come closer, just stood there. But I could feel her presence, feel the cold seeping into the cab like a physical force. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at her, praying she would disappear.
But she didn't.
She just stayed there, like she was waiting for something. Finally, after what felt like hours, the engine roared to life. I didn't waste a second. I threw the truck into gear and peeled out of there, the woman disappearing into the mist behind me. I never told anyone about that night. Not my boss, not my friends, no one. But I never forgot it. Every time I'm out on the road, driving through the dark, I keep my eyes on the horizon, praying I never see her again. But sometimes I think I feel her. I don't know how I made it through the rest of that drive. My hands were shaking so bad that I almost veered off the road a few times, but I just kept going, kept pushing forward, telling myself that if I could make it to the next town, everything would be fine. There was a weight on my chest, like someone was pressing down hard, making it hard to breathe. When I finally saw the glow of the next town's lights in the distance, relief washed over me. I pulled into a small truck stop on the edge of town, a worn-out place with flickering neon signs. I parked, shut off the engine, and just sat there for a minute, catching my breath. I decided I wasn't sleeping in my rig that night. No way. There was a cheap-looking motel attached to the truck stop, and I figured I could grab a room, crash for a few hours, and figure out what the hell to do next. Maybe call a mechanic in the morning. Anything to put some distance between me and whatever was out there. The guy at the front desk of the motel didn't even look up when I came in, just handed me a key without a word. Room 12. I didn't care. As long as it had 4 walls and a lock on the door, it was good enough for me. The room was exactly what you'd expect: a bed with an old scratchy comforter, a tiny TV bolted to the wall, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke clinging to the air. But at least it felt safe. I threw my bag down, locked the door behind me, and collapsed onto the bed. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My body was still on edge, my mind racing with images of that woman, her pale face and those black, empty eyes. I kept hearing her voice, though she hadn't said a word. Like she was whispering inside my head, telling me something. Something I didn't want to hear. I turned the TV on, hoping the noise would drown out the thoughts. Some late-night infomercial about kitchen gadgets. I stared at the screen, letting the voices wash over me, trying to convince myself that I was safe, that whatever had happened back on that road was over. But then I heard it. A knock. At first, I thought I was imagining it. It was so faint, like a light tap on the door, barely audible over the sound of the TV. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my ears. Another knock. This time, louder. I froze, staring at the door. I didn't want to go near it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to stay put, to ignore it, to act like I hadn't heard anything. But the knocking continued, slow, deliberate. Who the hell could it be at this hour? I got up, moving as quietly as I could, and tiptoed to the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear. Maybe it was just the front desk guy, checking in on the guests. Maybe it was nothing. And then came the voice. Let me in. A woman's voice, soft, but with a sharp edge to it, like a blade sliding across glass. Please, she whispered. Let me in. My blood turned to ice. I didn't need to open the door to know who it was. I backed away, stumbling over the chair in the corner of the room. My mind was racing, my body frozen in place. It couldn't be her. There was no way she could have followed me here. The knocking grew more insistent, louder, more frantic. Let me in, she repeated, her voice rising. Please. I'm cold. I'm so cold. I grabbed the chair and wedged it under the doorknob, my hands shaking. The knocking turned into pounding now, like someone was trying to break the door down. The walls were shaking with the force of it. Let me in, she screamed, her voice distorting into something not human, something that made my stomach turn. I backed into the far corner of the room, as far from the door as I could get. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. The pounding on the door was relentless, and her voice kept echoing in my head. I know you can hear me. Let me in. And then, it stopped. Silence. I didn't move for what felt like hours, just standing there in the corner, too afraid to breathe. The room was still. The only sound was the low hum of the TV, now playing some late-night news segment. I waited. And waited. Nothing. After what felt like an eternity, I slowly crept back to the door, pressing my ear against it again. No sound. No movement. I glanced out the small window next to the bed, pulling the curtains back just a little. The parking lot was empty, just my truck sitting there, illuminated by the flickering motel sign. Had I imagined it? Was it the lack of sleep, the stress? Maybe I just cracked after all those hours on the road. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But as I stood there, trying to calm my racing heart, I noticed something. A small, dark spot on the floor, just inside the doorway. I crouched down to get a better look, my hands trembling. It was wet. A small puddle of water, like something or someone had been standing there dripping. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't close my eyes once. I just sat there on the bed, waiting for the morning light to chase away whatever nightmare had followed me off that highway. When dawn finally broke, I grabbed my things, threw them in the truck, and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't care about the delivery, didn't care about anything except putting as much distance as possible between me and that motel. But even now, as I drive down different highways, hundreds of miles away, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there. Watching. Waiting. And sometimes, late at night, when the road is long and empty, I swear I hear that soft knock. Right behind me. I didn't stop driving for hours after I left that motel. Every trucker has those long stretches of road where you feel like you're being chased by something, even if it's just the ticking clock. But this time, it wasn't just time on my heels. I could feel it, her, still out there, just beyond the reach of my headlights. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I had to pull into a rest area. It was early morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The place was mostly empty, just a few cars parked under the trees, and a couple of other trucks idling further down the lot. It seemed quiet enough, and quiet was all I wanted. I parked the rig, killed the engine, and sat there for a while, staring at the empty road ahead. The last couple of hours felt like a fever dream, and I kept trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. The woman in white, the knocking, the voice, it had to be some kind of waking nightmare. Lack of sleep can make you see things, hear things. But deep down, I knew. I knew it wasn't just my imagination. Still, I needed to rest. My body was screaming for it. So I locked the doors, reclined the seat, and tried to settle in. It didn't take long for sleep to claim me. And that's when the dreams started. I was back on the highway, driving through the rain. The road stretched out forever in front of me, winding through dense, shadowy trees. The sky was a dark, sickly shade of green, like a storm was about to break. I felt cold, colder than I've ever felt in my life, like ice water was running through my veins. In the dream, I wasn't alone. I saw her again, standing by the side of the road, just like before. Only this time, she wasn't far away. She was closer, close enough that I could see her face clearly. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, those dark bottomless eyes, were locked on mine. Her mouth was moving, whispering something I couldn't hear over the roar of the truck's engine. I tried to look away, tried to floor the gas and drive past her, but no matter how fast I went, she stayed with me, running alongside the truck, her white dress flapping in the wind like tattered wings. Her hand reached out, fingers brushing against the glass of my window. Then her voice cut through the roar of the engine. "Why didn't you stop?" I jolted awake, gasping for air, my heart slamming against my ribs. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. It took a few seconds to remember I was at the rest stop, the sun now fully risen, bathing everything in a pale morning light. But something felt wrong. I wiped the sweat from my face and glanced out the window, half expecting to see her standing there, staring back at me. But the lot was still empty, just a few other trucks parked at the far end. Then I noticed something. My passenger side window was fogged up. Not all of it, just a small patch near the bottom corner, like someone had pressed their hand against the glass. My stomach twisted. I leaned in closer, staring at the spot, hoping it was just condensation from the cold night air. But as I got closer, I saw it, 5 faint fingerprints, smeared across the glass. I jerked back, my mind racing. I had locked the doors. I was sure of it. No one could have gotten inside. Right? I grabbed my keys, started the truck, and pulled out of the lot without looking back. The sun was climbing higher now, and the day seemed brighter, safer. But that feeling of being watched never left me. I tried to focus on the road, on the destination ahead. I told myself I just needed to make it to the next town, finish the delivery, and maybe then I could figure out what the hell was going on. But as the miles ticked by, I couldn't shake the memory of those fingerprints on the glass. I couldn't shake the sound of her voice, that whisper that seemed to echo in the back of my mind. "Why didn't you stop?" That's when the radio crackled to life. It was the CB, the kind of radio chatter you get used to hearing after years on the road. But this wasn't normal trucker banter. There was a static-filled voice, distant and garbled, like it was coming from far away. At first, I couldn't make out the words. Just static and whispers, the kind that send a chill up your spine. I fiddled with the dial, trying to clear it up, but no matter what I did, the voice remained faint, just beyond reach. And then, through the static, I heard it. "Stop for her." I yanked my hand away from the radio like it had burned me. My heart was pounding again, harder than ever. The voice kept going, crackling through the static. "She's waiting. You didn't stop." My blood ran cold. I slammed my hand down on the power button, cutting off the radio mid-sentence. Silence filled the cab, but it didn't help. My mind was racing, every nerve in my body on edge. I forced myself to keep driving, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to pull over, stop the truck, and just walk away. But I knew that wouldn't help. She'd follow me. She'd always follow me. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road, I realized something. I wasn't alone. The rearview mirror, the one I had been avoiding, caught my eye. My breath hitched in my throat as I glanced at it, and there in the back seat, I saw her. The woman in white. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, and she smiled. I slammed the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt on the empty highway. I turned around, ready to fight or flee, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But the back seat was empty. Nothing. I sat there for a moment, gasping for breath, my hands shaking on the wheel. I was losing it. I had to be. I started the truck again, pulling back onto the road, and drove. But from that moment on, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, watching, waiting. And every now and then, I catch a glimpse of her, just out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes in the rearview mirror, sometimes standing on the side of the road. I never stop. I can't. Because I know if I do, she'll finally catch me. I wish I could tell you that the sightings stopped. That after that night, things went back to normal, and I could get back to my life. But they didn't. They got worse. A few weeks after I slammed on the brakes, I started getting headaches. The kind that feel like your skull's about to crack open. It usually hit me after dark, when the highway was empty and I was alone with my thoughts. It felt like pressure building in my brain, like someone was trying to push their way in. I'd stop for breaks, grab coffee, splash water on my face, but nothing helped. The pain wasn't just in my head anymore. It was in the air, thick and suffocating, clinging to me every time I turned a corner or drove through some empty stretch of road. And that's when the dreams got worse too. I'd be driving, like always, in the dead of night. But instead of the woman in white, I'd see something different. Shadowy figures, flickering in and out of the fog on the sides of the road. At first, they were just blurs, but then they became clearer. People. Men, women, kids, all standing there, faces blank, eyes black pits like hers. Just watching me drive by. And then one night, I saw her again. I was somewhere in Oklahoma, driving through a stretch of road where the trees pressed in close on either side, making it feel like the highway was a tunnel carved out of the earth. It was one of those long, never-ending nights where you lose track of time, and the road starts to feel like it's folding in on itself. That's when I saw her in the rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat. At first, I thought it was my imagination again, just another hallucination from too many hours behind the wheel. But this time, it felt different. Real. I didn't dare to turn around. I didn't have to. I could feel her presence, could feel the air in the cab getting colder by the second. It was like all the warmth had been sucked out, replaced by this bone-deep chill. I stared at her reflection in the mirror, her black eyes boring into mine. She wasn't smiling this time. Her expression was blank, emotionless, but her gaze was heavy, oppressive, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I didn't know what to do. My foot hovered over the brake pedal, instinct telling me to stop, to pull over, to get the hell out of there. But my gut told me something else. Don't stop. I kept driving, my eyes flicking between the road and the mirror, where she just sat there, staring, not moving, not saying a word. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I don't know. Time didn't seem real anymore. All I knew was that she was still there, watching me, waiting for something. And then, slowly, she started to move. Her head tilted to the side, and her lips parted, just slightly. "You didn't stop for me," she whispered, her voice like nails on glass. "You should have stopped." I felt a wave of nausea roll over me, bile rising in my throat. The cold in the cab intensified, and the air felt thick, like I was breathing through a wet blanket.